So finally, we come to housework, all that unpaid work that gets done in the home that has to get done, otherwise, people don't survive, but that's often invisible, disregarded, or not really considered work at all. So, sociologists often divide the unpaid work of caring for families into a couple of categories. There's material, hands-on work that reproduces the physical conditions of life. So cooking so that people have food, cleaning so that we live in somewhat hygienic circumstances, shopping to bring provisions into the home, fixing things that break down or fall apart so that the physical concrete conditions for human life to sustain itself are reproduced. Many sociologists have drawn attention to the kind of cyclical nature of a lot of this unpaid work to reproduce the physical conditions of life, which is of a form such that when something is done, it gets undone and needs to be done again. So, doing the laundry, we wash clothes, linens, blankets, what have you. People take them out, use them, wear them, they get dirty, they go back into the laundry, we wash them again, they get clean again. Similarly with preparing food and cooking. Meals are cooked, people eat them, the dishes need to be cleaned up, and then, a couple of hours later, it's time to do the whole thing over again. So, this constant sort of cyclical, repetitious nature of work in the home, it makes it different from a lot of the things that people do for pay outside the home, where you have more of a linear progression. You accomplish one thing and then you go on to accomplish the next thing, rather than doing something which then becomes undone and then has to be constantly done again. Another category of work that's often not recognized as work is the emotional work of care in the home, which is everything that is done in order to create a state that's conducive to psychological well-being and to social harmony. And these can include things like celebrations, rituals, graduation parties, birthday parties, holiday dinners, providing guidance or support to members of the household as they navigate various issues in their lives, ensuring that people remain connected, sometimes referred to as kin keeping, through communications, updates, birthday cards, you name it. This is often not recognized, this emotional component is often not recognized as actual work because it's often regarded as an expression of love, which is quite true. It can be, the natural sort of outgrowth of love or affection for others. But it's important to remember that just because something is uh, done out of love or done out of affection or warm feelings, it's still work, and it's still valuable and important because it creates those conditions of well-being that are necessary in order for the family to survive. When it comes to how this all breaks down by gender, there's a huge research, literature, scholarship on this, and I'm just going to touch on a few of the highlights. One of the big questions tends to be, is it that men and women do choose to do different things, or is it that different tasks get done by men and women, which I realize sounds a little bit confusing, but I hope that I'll make it a bit more clear. Some sociologists start with the people, the men and women in the household, and then look at what they do. Others start with the tasks that need to get done, need to get accomplished, and then look at who does those tasks using observational methods like time use surveys, in-home direct observation studies, 24-hour recall studies, and so forth. And there are two things that they found. One is that women tend to do a lot more, and I'll say more about that in a couple of moments. And the second is that not only are there quantitative differences between the work that men and women do in the home, but this work also appears to be qualitatively different. What I've got here is big, broad generalizations. Individual cases may vary a lot. There's a lot of diversity and so forth. But in terms of the big tendencies identified in the literature, here's what we've got. So you can think of it as two sort of clusters of tasks. And in one cluster, you have tasks which are necessary on a daily basis. These would be things like with young children, making dinner for kids. You'd have to do that every day. You can't make 5 dinners on Friday and then not really do anything else about food until the following Tuesday or Wednesday. They're things that are need to be done on fairly short time cycles. In the same group, we find tasks that are closely associated with functions of the human body. So again, think of small children, diaper changes, bathing, with care of the elderly. You're getting into some of the same territory there. With people who are sick and need tending, their body needs help. There are tasks that are associated with that. These tasks need to be what economists and sociologists refer to as time inflexible, which is that they have to happen when they have to happen. Again, think of the example of making dinner for kids. If you have young children, there might be a window of time within which dinner can be served, anywhere between 5:30 and 6:30. But typically there is not the flexibility to make dinner at 3 in the afternoon on one day and then at midnight a few days later, to sort of choose to schedule when you're going to feed your kids around other things that you want to do. And also in this sort of basket of tasks goes those things that can be described as polychronic, which means a lot of things happening at the same time, which is another way of saying multitasking. So imagine someone, they're on the phone trying to register their kid for swimming lessons. At the same time, they're kind of poking dishes and plates into the dishwasher to get them clean. And they're also keeping an eye on the baby who's crawling around to make sure that the baby doesn't put something in their mouth that ought not to be in their mouth. So some tasks lend themselves to being done at the same time as other tasks. In that example I just gave, it would be hard to identify what is the primary thing this person is doing if they're kind of doing three things at once, childcare and family scheduling and cleanup all at the same time. And tasks with these characteristics, the daily or short cycle necessity, the association with bodily functions of various sorts, the rigidity or inflexibility about time, and the polychronicity, we find tend to fall to women more than they fall to men. On the other side, we have a bundle of tasks which are also really important to maintain families and keep them going. And these include tasks that have a longer time cycle than daily. So things like changing the oil in a vehicle, replacing batteries and smoke alarms, mowing the lawn. These are things that don't need to be done, that, can be done once a week, maybe once every 6 months. They don't need to be repeatedly done and redone quite so frequently. These tasks, like the examples I just gave, are usually oriented to maintaining and preserving non-human objects, things. So fixing things that are broken, repairing things that need repairs, doing basic maintenance, putting on the storm windows, taking the storm windows down. All, although they are, the end goal is to make human life possible and pleasant and healthy and so forth, they involve interaction more with objects and things and machines than with actual sort of organic human bodies. These tasks also tend to be, all other things being equal, more time flexible than the more feminized tasks. It doesn't mean that there's complete and utter time flexibility. You know, if you're getting the snow tires put on the car, or there's a, you know, window of 6 weeks, 8 weeks where it is feasible and makes sense to do that. You can't sort of defer it indefinitely until July. But there's a lot more flexibility within that window. Similarly, with something like mowing the lawn, you know, that probably needs to happen within the next day or two, but it doesn't need to happen every day between 5:30 and 6:30. So time flexible tasks can be sort of organized around other activities that a person might want to engage in. And along with time flexibility goes the monochronic nature of tasks. These are things that are done one at a time and don't lend themselves well to the sort of divided attention, you know, three or four things at once quality of polychronic tasks. So if you're changing the oil in the car, you're probably not simultaneously making dinner. If you're repairing the deep freeze in the basement that's acting up, that's probably all that you've got on your plate to do right at that moment. You're not also folding the laundry or ironing or talking to the kids' teacher at school about something that's going on at the school. And this bundle of tasks, the um, longer time cycles, not necessarily daily, associated with things more than embodiment, time flexibility and monochronicity tend to fall towards men more so than women. So we have these tasks which are not, there's nothing essential or innate that makes certain tasks, in quotes, feminine or masculine. It's not like there's something about the true nature of doing, you know, doing the dishes or replacing a car battery that makes it feminine or masculine. Yet somehow they tend not to be equally distributed across the genders, that we can say that there are gendered patterns in housework. Even more so, there's gendered time allocation to unpaid tasks. And this, it looks very similar to what you saw a little while ago with the time use hours per week for childcare. This is from the same Statistics Canada survey. Couples engaged in various forms of employment, male-female couples, and comparing the hours of unpaid work minus childcare, taking childcare out, by couple employment status. And what you see once again is going from left to right, no matter what the configuration of employment within the couple, whether both are in the workplace and both are earning, whether one is earning and the other isn't, or even where nobody's in the workplace, nobody's earning. Women still report they're still clocking significantly more hours of unpaid work in the home than men are. Even in couple situations where the woman is also the only earner in the couple and the only one in the workforce, on average, in these situations, women are reporting that they're spending more time in unpaid work. I added on at the far right end similar results for people who are single, who are not co-residing with a partner. And you'll see that, well, first of all, they do significantly less unpaid work than people who are residing with partners, both men and women. And a lot of that has to do with children. Children are more likely to be found in households that have two adults rather than one. Um, Again, women are putting in more time when they're single than men are, but not the differences are not as marked as when you're comparing them within co-residing couples. So we've got qualitative distinctions in terms of gender and household work. And we've also got here quantitative distinctions just in the sheer number of hours that people report engaging in these tasks. Now, this gender gap, these gender distinctions in unpaid work are sensitive to changes in some characteristics of the individuals and of the environment that they live in. So again, huge literature on this. I'm just pulling a few of the highlights. One is that the gender gap, the difference between what men are doing and what women are doing in heterosexual couples tends to be greatest among those who are formally married, as compared to those who are either single and not living with a partner or common law. And this is a kind of fascinating finding. Some sociologists explain it by saying that couples that get married rather than living common law tend to be a little bit more traditional, maybe a little bit more conservative in their orientation because they're opting for that recognition of marriage, and therefore perhaps more conservative or more traditional in their division of gendered labor. Other sociologists have looked at longitudinal studies where people who were living together then get married, and they find that there's something about marriage itself, entering into this institution of marriage that actually changes the way male and female partners interact and the way they divide their labor, such that couples who transition from living together, cohabiting, common law, to formal official marriage, you start to see the gender gap opening up, which is pretty fascinating and probably has something to do with the meaning or the symbolic weight of what it means to be married, Mr. and Mrs., rather than just living together. Presence of children increases the gender gap quite a bit. As mentioned earlier, women are much more likely to um, reduce their engagement with the paid workforce or to take on some of the work of intensified parenting than men are. So the more, as children arrive, typically women, well, both parents pick up a lot more unpaid work, but the difference for women is significantly more than the difference for men once kids are in the picture. Inequality in earning power and education level. When one partner earns significantly more or has significantly more education than the other partner, that's where you tend to also see disparities in terms of unpaid work in the home. And this doesn't always work the way that you might expect it to work. In heterosexual couples where the woman earned more than the man, research has found that you still see a gender gap such that women are doing more unpaid work than men are doing. We saw a little bit of that in the previous slide with the situations in couples where the woman was the earner in the workforce and the man was not, yet women on average were doing more work at home than men were. The couples that come closest to gender parity are those that are also closest in terms of earning power, education level, the closest to being peers. That tends to predict more parity or more equality in unpaid work. Low income households, often because only one person's in the workforce, tend to have greater gender gaps in terms of unpaid work. And finally, age. The older uh, the couple is, like people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, the more likely there is to be a significant gender gap. And that's just, well, it could be many things. It's a reflection of historic changes that have changed the way people see marriage, the way people see gender and responsibilities, and so forth, such that younger couples tend to have closer to parity than older ones do. Million-dollar question then is why? What is going on here? Why does this gender gap in unpaid work persist when gender gaps in so many other areas of life are shrinking uh, or decreasing significantly? And there are, of course, a million theories as to why. If we discount the biological essentialist idea that women just have some gene or something that makes them better at this stuff than men do, I'll give you a rundown of some of the theoretical orientations here. One is modeling. We replicate what we grew up with, and in a situation where people are growing up and seeing, if they have two parents of different genders, they're seeing the male parent as the primary earner and the female parent as the primary caregiver in the home. They will, this behavior just carries through into the next generation, which, okay, but that doesn't account really for why things actually do change. They may not change that fast, and they may not change as dramatically as people might believe that they have changed, but they do change. And so simply relying on modeling as an explanation doesn't, it tells you why things stay the same. It doesn't tell you why social change happens. Other psychologists borrow gender schema theory, and they argue that through a combination of everything from modeling to advertising to sort of, popular notions about male brains and female brains, certain tasks get schematized or get typed as masculine or as feminine. In the same way that colors get schematized, pink for girls, blue for boys, and beer for men and fizzy drinks for women. That because the human brain has this drive to gender everything and assign genders to things. It happens with unpaid work as well, and that's why we see these distinctions between, on average, what men and women do. Um, doesn't really explain why the things that women end up doing tend to be more onerous or more demanding than the things men end up doing. It's not like the distinction between pink and blue, where they're both colors and not really a big difference. Um, it it is objectively more arduous, more demanding to be um, doing those tasks in the feminized basket than the ones in the masculinized basket. And so what we're seeing, or what appears to be happening, is that men are more likely to embark on things which allow them more leisure or more time to rest or are just less demanding. And women do the remainder, women do the bulk of it, which looks like some sort of gender power thing going on there. Another theory coming out of economists is that um, men and women don't rock the boat or don't change the gendered allocation of tasks because certain things, like childcare in particular, are understood as not actually work at all. It's just love, it's a labor of love. So men and women, even if they're not trying to stick each other with unpleasant things to do and so forth, they they will not equally share childcare and the work of raising a child because that is understood as not being work. It's love, it's affection, it's something that people do because it's gratifying and emotionally satisfying. And it's not like cleaning the bathroom, which has no redeeming characteristics to it really at all. So economists who take this view say, the gender gap isn't really such a bad thing because so much of what falls on the feminine side is within the affective economy, affect being another word for emotion. It's emotionally gratifying or satisfying activities, and therefore the fact that women do a lot more of it than men is not really a problem. Um, One other kind of set of theories or body of theories has to do with these come out of sort of functionalist perspectives in sociology that explain kind of why things are as they are because people are specialized and labor is divided. And they operate on the idea that their uh, gendered work in the home, family work, may not be equal or equitable, but it is complementary in that both men and women are doing what is necessary in order to keep the family going. How does this complementarity work? Well, there are a couple of perspectives from economics, neither of which really hold up all that well when you look at the evidence. One is the idea of time availability. And what this says is that the person whose time is the most flexible will end up picking up most of the unpaid work, especially unpaid work which is inflexible, like feeding the kids or giving baths to babies or what have you. So then, what structures one's time flexibility? Economists look to work outside the home, and they observe that women, and we'll talk more about this when we get to gender in the workforce, women tend to gravitate towards jobs or occupations which have a degree of time flexibility, either because they are able to work part-time or move in and out of the workforce, or because they are not in positions that require long extended hours or that require that you must be here doing this thing at this time. So a lot of much of this work is located in the service sector, and we'll talk more about that later. Some economists have also been doing fascinating stuff with self-employment and women. Many, entrepreneurs, people working from home, the majority of them are women. And the most common reason they give for working from home, starting their own business, and I mean working from home should be clear here pre-COVID, before people had to work from home quite so much, is so that I can be available for the children, so that I can be available to look after the home. So it becomes a kind of, chicken and egg thing. Do women do most of the housework because they have greater time flexibility? Or do they make decisions that maximize time flexibility because they believe themselves to be responsible for, or it's their job to do the majority of the unpaid work in the home? Related to that is the notion of resource balancing. And this is the idea that in a household, all the adults ideally bring something to the table and to keep the household going. And if you don't have money to bring to the table, what you have to contribute is your time. So resource balancing says, well, if there's one person whose contributions is are made up of a lot of money, the other person is the one who's going to pick up most of the work in the home because they don't have that money to bring to the table to contribute. What they've got is time. So if this worked perfectly in couples, you'd see the person who has the least financial resources, the least money to bring to the table, doing most of the unpaid work. But as you've just seen in those time use studies for both childcare and other forms of unpaid work, even in situations where there's a heterosexual couple, the woman is employed and earning, and the man is not. The woman is still, with a lot of individual variation, overall, on average, still picking up more of the unpaid work at home. So there's something about gender. There's something about gender ideology and gendered responsibility. Maybe there's something to this idea of gender schemas being imposed on certain tasks that trumps, that overrides these, super rational calculations about, like, some people bring money to the table and some people bring time. So the takeaway from this is, although people aspire to gender equity and gender neutrality in many aspects of family life, gender and the social construction of gender is still a really powerful influence on the way that we lead our lives in families.